the future of solar is small. Google Loon gives us super fast Google Fiber without wires. Then Tim Stevens and Cranky Hippo come on to talk about journalism, technology, and racing. Padre's Corner is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Padre's Corner is provided by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Padre's Corner, episode 12, recorded October 28th, 2014. Racing with Tim Stevens. Welcome to Padre's Corner. I'm Father Robert Ballas, the digital Jesuit. Padre SJ in the Twit TV chat room. Padre's Corner is a show, well, where we put you into the mind of a Jesuit priest and see if you come out sane on the other side. Now, as is our way, we're going to start off with some freaking science. And specifically, I want to talk about solar cells. Now, we all love solar cells. Solar cells are the future as far as I'm concerned. It gives us a way to convert sunlight directly into electrical energy. And, well, the technology that goes into solar cells is actually worthy of note. It's not just magic. It's not a black box. There's no super secret sorcery that goes on. It's just freaking science. Now, the way that solar cells work is that they're a wafer-thin crystalline silicon on cadmium telluride or silicon structure. Sunlight is comprised of photons. Photons strike the crystalline structure, and some of those photons from the sunlight will reflect. Some will pass through. Some will be absorbed. The ones that get absorbed transfer their energy into an electron in one of the atoms in the crystalline structure. Now, the additional energy allows the electron to escape from its normal orbit around the nucleus of that atom, and this escape leaves a hole, a p-n junction. An electron from a separate layer of semiconductor flows into that hole, and at that p-n junction, that area where you've got the electrons changing sides, well, you have a field. You form an electrical field, which makes power available for the circuit. It's a fantastic technology, and it's something that, I've been fascinated with since my early childhood. But there is one little problem with solar, and that is to make super efficient solar cells, the solar cells that we need to be able to power things like industrial equipment and houses and entire city blocks. You need to use materials that aren't all that friendly. You need cadmium and telluride, both of which are rare earths and both of which are actually pretty dang toxic. And not only that, but working with those materials tends to leave behind a wasteland of earth and gravel and ground and mines that just really aren't inhabited for generations and generations. It is a small payoff to be able to pay to create cells that will generate power into the indefinite future. But still, if we're going to be able to provide enough solar power to power entire countries and entire industrialized areas, we need a way to create these cells that's not going to destroy the land, that's not going to require rare earth materials, which will eventually run out, and that's not going to be so expensive that only the richest of the rich can afford them. Well, luckily, researchers from the University of Alberta have figured out exactly how to do that. They figured out a way to make solar panels without those rare earth materials. Now, they're using phosphorus and zinc in conjunction with nanoparticles to generate power from the sun. The process is pretty much the same. The nanoparticles absorb photons, but then they conduct electricity from the phosphorus and the zinc materials in which it's sandwiched. Now, currently the tech isn't as efficient as cadmium or telluride-based cells, but it could be as nanoparticle manufacturing processes improve. And the best part, phosphorus and zinc are both incredibly plentiful. They're one of the most plentiful elements that you're going to find on this planet. They're not toxic. You can work with them, and there's no industrial restriction, and they're cheap, which means that in the future, big solar may come from small particles. Now, we're done with some of our freaking science. What do you say we move over to some freaking engineering? This one has me really, really excited because, well, I'm a geek. I'm a networking geek, and nothing gets me more excited than faster ways to connect wirelessly. That's exactly what Google may have figured out with their new R&D project. Now, do you remember when Google made Project Loon? That's right. Loon was that weird pie-in-the-sky R&D project to connect rural areas. Now, the idea was to use these high-altitude balloons flown up 20 miles to create an airborne wireless mesh network. It was to deliver 3G speeds, and the balloons would maneuver by rising and falling to take advantage of wind currents at different altitudes. In other words, you could put a balloon up there, and as long as it was using the wind currents properly, it could station keep with very little use of power. Now, of course, it was that pie in the sky project, but even though it was really only deployed and tested in New Zealand, we may now be seeing the fruits of the loon with Google Fiber, but without the fiber. You see, Google has just filed some papers with the FCC for their next generation wireless network, and it owes a big debt to Project Loon. What makes this different? Because we've all heard about municipal wireless before. Well, what's different about this new project is that Google will be deploying in San Mateo and Mountain View, California, a system of arrays that combine 3 separate radios, a 5.8, a 24.2, and a 71.6 gigahertz radio into a single array that would beam high-speed wireless networking around the city. Now, let's break it down. Let's look at the technologies that are actually involved. The 5.8 gigahertz is what you would get in your higher-end dual-band router. Now, we like 5.8 gigahertz because it's not nearly as crowded as 2.4. If anyone here has tried to connect to a 2.4 gigahertz wireless network, you know how futile it can be in a crowded, congested area. There's really only 3 channels in the 2.4 gigahertz band, and so you're going to get crowded out. Now, in the 5.8 gigahertz band, you've got 21 channels, and you've got more bandwidth per channel, which means you can get faster speeds without as much interference. You kind of don't get as much distance as you do with 2.4. Now, in addition to the 5.8 gigahertz radio, Google will also include a 24.2 gigahertz radio. This is the same radio that they used in Project Loon. The one that they used was made by Ubiquiti Wireless, and they made that 24.2, 25 gigahertz point-to-point wireless system that could deliver 1.5 gigabits per second up to 13 kilometers away wirelessly. Now, they're also including a millimeter wave radio, that's 71 to 76 gigahertz, as a backhaul. They've been able to develop radios that, combined with some special antennas, have been able to get them more than 10 gigabits per second per link over 25 kilometers. What does this mean? It means that Google could come into a city with Google Fiber to certain strategic points and then link them. It becomes the backhaul for this wireless mesh. You use the millimeter wave and the 24.2 Ubiquiti radios to link together a mesh of radios that then use 5.8 gigahertz to connect down to individual clients, houses, and businesses. What this means is that we could get close to the complete speeds of Google Fiber without actually having to have fiber run into our house or our business. It means lower cost, it means faster speeds immediately, and it also means that they're going to keep up the pressure on the telcos. And you know that, I'm all about that. Now, when we come back, we're going to be showing off a little product review that I had for Before You Buy. It's a device that I thought was promising, something that I actually thought was pretty dang cool, but turned out to be a bit of a loser. But before we do that, I want to bring a special word. This is not advertising, but this is just a heartfelt message out to a fellow content creator, a good friend and a good man. You may have heard that OMG Chad is going to be setting off on his own. That's right. Lisa and Leo were nice enough to give him back OMG Craft. They want him to create great content. And he was really good with it. I mean, he understood something that we don't really do well here at Twit, which was gaming. So he has taken this, and now he started up a Patreon of his own. That's right. Our favorite red-headed content creator is heading out to make stuff that just could be described as amazing. Now, with all the projects that are running around in his head, it was only a matter of time before he pushed off and got elbows deep into making the coolest, the freshest, and the craziest content that he could. And it's time that we help. Just go to patreon.com/OMGChad and contribute to his Patreon. He just put this up, and obviously he's got supporters who really want to see what he can make. And if you like OMG Chad, if you like OMG Craft, if you like the content that's created by our favorite redhead, then please jump on over and give your support in the form of some cash. Now, this is the time of the show where we have to talk about the tech. I usually like very interesting tech. I like to give manufacturers credit for giving me a device that I haven't seen before, or for combining a bunch of different devices that I have to carry, because I do travel a lot. And if you can combine 3 or 4 or 5 of the devices that I use most often and give me one easy-to-use, inexpensive package, well, I'm all for it. But every once in a while, there's a manufacturer that reaches and, like Icarus, falls to the ground. Let's take a look at the Sprint Live Pro. The Sprint Live Pro is marketed as the Swiss Army knife of electronics. Available from Sprint for $300 with a 2-year service agreement, the Live Pro combines a hotspot, Pico projector, battery bank, and Android device into a neat 4.7 by 4.7 by 1.1-inch 14-ounce package. The left side of the Live Pro houses the adjustment ring for the projector, buttons for power and the power bank, as well as slots for SIM and microSD cards. To the rear of the device is power, USB, full-size HDMI, and a headphone jack. Underneath the Live Pro, you'll find a standard mounting point for attaching the Live Pro to a tripod and a kickstand for angling the projector. The entire package is built around a 5,000 mAh lithium-ion battery that can drive the hotspot for up to 10 hours. It was also enough to fully charge the 3,100 mAh battery in my OnePlus One and still have enough juice for 4 hours of hotspot operation. That is a lot of power, but running the projector will kill the battery in about 100 minutes, and having the hotspot active at the same time will drop your runtime below an hour. And unfortunately, because of the large battery and power draw, you can't charge the Live Pro from a USB port like you might with a standard hotspot. It needs a 12-volt adapter, which limits the charging options. The Live Pro comes with Android 4.2 Jelly Bean and a 4-inch 800 by 480 WVGA touchscreen. In addition to the touchscreen, the Live Pro has the full Android complement of buttons, as well as quick keys for volume, projector, and sleep. I was a little disappointed that the Live Pro uses Android 4.2, but the dual-core 1.2 GHz processor makes it feel snappy. And even 4.2 gives the Live Pro notable features like the ability to wirelessly project and a secondary device for checking your apps. The projector is literally the bright spot of the Live Pro. Sporting a 100-lumen light source and a DLP element, the Live Pro natively projects 854 by 480, though it will scale inputs of up to 1080p. In addition to being able to play whatever media might be in the microSD slot, USB port, or coming through HDMI, the Live Pro can also display whatever's seen on screen. The Live Pro packs a single speaker in the bottom of the unit that is plenty loud, which is good because when the fan starts up, you're going to need some volume. With decent indoor light power, loud if tinny audio, and an interface that can make the Live Pro a self-contained business projector or theater, the Live Pro definitely gets props for packing decent features into a small package. But then we get to the hotspot. And the hotspot on the Live Pro is, in a word, poor. I took the Live Pro to Petaluma, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, Berkeley, and Las Vegas, and it very rarely connected to Sprint's new Spark LTE service with any measurable signal strength. In fact, it almost never connected to Sprint's 3G service. We thought that there may have been a problem with the review unit, but even replacing it left us with subpar cellular coverage. What makes this unacceptable is that I've tried other Sprint devices, including a Galaxy Note and other Sprint hotspots, and connection speeds through those devices reached past 9 to 15 megabits per second, while the Live Pro struggled to go past 1 and 5 on a supposedly superior network. Still, with the combination of the other features, the lack of a usable hotspot wouldn't be a problem if the Sprint Live Pro weren't a hotspot that was supposed to use Sprint's latest generation LTE service that you had to pay for every month for 2 years. The somewhat sensical combination of technologies in the Sprint Live Pro left me scratching my head, wondering if this was the most stupidly awesome gadget ever or the most awesomely stupid Frankenstein's monster. Stupidly awesome. Awesomely stupid. Stupid awesome. Awesome, so stupid. Oh, so awesome. Oh, so stupid. In the end, the Sprint Live Pro is an interesting multifunction device with really bad implementations of some of those functions. It really pained me to pan that device because, again, I love interesting new combinations of tech that I've already used. But I think what did it for me was the fact that it just was a poor hotspot. I would actually buy it if I could get it off contract and just go month to month. If it sold for $200, it would be a great device, a Pico projector, a battery bank, and say a small networking platform. But if I have to pay month to month for 24 months for a hotspot that's a really bad hotspot, no, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, I know something that does make a lot of sense, and that is my guest for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, you probably know him if you're in tech. You probably love him. He's the nicest man in technology, Mr. Tim Stevens. Thank you so very much for coming on Padre's Corner.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
We've been trying to get together for a while, but you've been a really busy man the last year. Can you tell us what you've been working on?
Yeah, I've been traveling all over the place lately. One of the big projects I've been working on this year is coverage of the Google Lunar X Prize, which is a competition that Google sponsored to basically fund a team or incentivize teams who are trying to put rovers on the moon. So there's basically a race going on right now with a bunch of private teams around the world that are basically trying to land rovers on the moon. And then the first one to get to the moon and cover 500 meters wins a $20 million prize funded by Google. So I've been visiting quite a few of the teams here in the U.S. We've had a couple teams in India, Tokyo, elsewhere around the world, doing a series of videos on CNET to cover the series. So it's pretty exciting stuff, but it's made for a lot of travel over the past couple of months.
How in the world did you get involved with that? I mean, I know you've been involved in tech, and I've seen you on Twitter. You're traveling all over the place. But to hear that you're involved in a project that could, I don't say this lightly, could reshape the future of humanity, that's a little different than the regular journalist beat.
Yeah, and it's exciting stuff because these aren't major government entities that are doing this. These are small teams that are independently funded that are working on doing this. So one of the teams, Astrobotic, is actually based in Pittsburgh and is largely made up of students at Carnegie Mellon University. So, you know, when I was in college, I did some pretty exciting stuff, but I certainly didn't do anything involving putting a rover on the moon. That's very exciting indeed. But I was actually lucky enough to be invited to the X Prize Visioneering Conference a couple of years back to participate there, which is kind of their annual get-together where a lot of people kind of powwow and figure out what are some of the world's biggest challenges and how they should address them. So I've kind of maintained touch with the X Prize Foundation since then. And when the opportunity arose to kind of be a somewhat embedded journalist with this competition that's going on this summer, I definitely jumped at it. And thankfully, we were able to figure things out at CNET and at CBS to make sense to do it. So we've been covering throughout the year, and the year is winding down. There's some final testing going on over the next couple of weeks and couple of months, and then the final deadline for the competition is the end of next year. So we've still got a bit of a ways to go before people launch their rockets. But there's been a lot of good stuff going on this summer.
Tim, I got to ask this. I might as well ask it now. I was going to talk about this later in the conversation, but now that we're into X Prize and this idea of privately funded ventures into space, one of the things that I hear a lot, and this may just be standard trolling, but it strikes a chord every once in a while, is that there's a Silicon Valley mindset that everything in the world can be solved with technology. And so they look at things like the X Prize, and they look at things that privately funded ventures into space exploration. And they say, well, is this really where we should be spending our money? The one that I hear most often in the circles I run in is, well, why can't we dedicate research towards curing hunger or growing more food or et cetera, et cetera? And that, of course, I'm in tech. That's not my stand. But have you heard any of that criticism? In doing your beats, do you ever get people saying, well, why are you always covering the pie in the sky technology? Why don't you ever do something closer to Earth?
Absolutely, yeah, and I've certainly heard that in relation to the X Prize, but ultimately they do quite a few competitions. It's just that some of them get more publicity than others. There was the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Cleanup Challenge a couple of years ago, actually, which was basically a fairly low-tech solution to basically solving oil cleanup issues in the ocean. You imagine a big oil slick, and the companies that are paid to clean up those oil slicks are paid by the hour. So there's really no incentive for them to improve their technology. But they threw an X Prize. It was funded by Wendy Schmidt, and ultimately they were able to get, I think, a 300% increase in performance, not with any real super high technology methods, just with kind of taking a new approach to sucking the oil off the surface of the ocean, and simply because nobody had really thought to bring any sort of incentivization to that that series of problems, more or less. And just by having this simple competition, suddenly they were able to make a huge leap forward and solving something that is not, a pie in the sky dream, something that is not, something that's only going to be enjoyed by the elite in the world, but something that's a real problem for a lot of people. So there's quite a few things going on like that. There's a new learning challenge that just launched, basically coming up with a better way to teach people how to read in developing nations, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of great stuff going on as well. It's just that, for a variety of reasons, rockets to the moon tend to get a few more eyes involved than perhaps a device to clean up some sludge in the ocean, unfortunately.
Yeah. But, it should be stated that one of the things that we learned from the Apollo project was how much trickle down there is in the technology. Right. I mean, yes, you spend billions and billions of dollars to send rockets into space, but along with that, you get advancements in computing power and in material science. And all those things do affect all the other parts of life. So at least, okay, that's the way that I grew up. And that's what I was always told about the space program. And that's what I've grown to believe. But it makes for a good narrative, don't you think?
Absolutely, it does, especially because there are a variety of economies that can be utilized on the moon and elsewhere in space. There's companies like Planetary Resources that are hoping to mine asteroids and pull back some very valuable minerals that are very difficult to find here on Earth, heavy metals and such that are very difficult to find and very environmentally dangerous to source here on Earth, could perhaps be more easily found in space and brought back to Earth. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And also, of course, when it comes to space exploration, one of the teams is actually hoping to explore some lunar caverns and see if there are actually caves on the moon that could be settled. And if there are, then that means that it would be much easier to set up a human settlement on the moon, because you wouldn't need to basically bring a house with you. You could just move into a cave and build a wall and you'd be good to go. So those sorts of discoveries could actually be very, very valuable going forward for space exploration and for future economies that we don't even know about yet.
Right. Let's take a step back from SpaceX and space exploration. We hear that from you. I mean, if anyone here has read your work, they know how deep you are into technology. But I want to talk a little bit about you. We don't get to talk
Okay.
about Tim Stevens enough. Can you tell us, where did you come from? Where were you born? How did you grow up?
Where did I come from? Well, I came from Vermont, actually, which is a place with not a whole lot of technology going on, although it is home to some of the fastest internet in the United States, I'm proud to say. But yeah, I grew up in a small town in Vermont, in the southeastern portion of the state, and then, had a wonderful, idyllic childhood there. Moved to New York, and then, went to school and studied for writing and software development. I wasn't really sure which path I wanted to choose, but I graduated right at the peak of the dot-com boom, which pretty much made up my mind for me. So I went into software consulting, did about an 8-year stint as software development, and then worked my way up to software architect and then enterprise architect. And then kind of got sick of that and had the opportunity to jump over to Engadget and do some full-time blogging there. I'd always been writing the whole time. I actually got my start writing while I was in college doing freelance video game development and game reviews. So my first gig was writing a review of Spot Goes to Hollywood, I think it was the game, on the Sega Saturn. I got that gig not because of my game writing skills, but because I was one of the few people who actually bought a Sega Saturn and so could play the game and write the review. And then, I kept up on the game reviewing while I was doing the software development thing, switched over to Engadget full-time after about 8 or 9 years in the software development field. And then I guess the rest is history. I was lucky enough to be able to be editor-in-chief at Engadget for almost 3 years, I think. And then about a year ago, switched over to CNET, and I've been very happy here since then.
Let me ask you about that transition between software developer and journalist, because I actually took the same path. I did my degree in software development, in software engineering, computer engineering, and I also did a fine arts minor. And I remember thinking, well, software development is fun, and I can do it, and I've got a mind for it. But at one point, I just said, this is no longer exciting. I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. What was that path for you? I mean, obviously, you spent more time in that field than I did, but that is still a pretty big jump to go between I'm going to consult and create software to I'm going to write about the industry.
It is a big jump on one level, but I was actually lucky enough to be able to do it in a pretty gradual way. Like I said, I got my start writing in college as well, and I always kept some freelance gigs just to kind of keep my feet in it here and there. But it was always, writing on weekends, writing in the mornings, that kind of thing. And I actually started writing at Engadget in 2005, just doing the odd post here and there. And then after a while, I'd start to get up at 5 in the morning and do maybe 2 or 3 hours of blogging. And then it got to be that I was doing 3 and 4 hours of blogging. And then it got to the point where I was actually cutting back on my consulting hours so that I could spend more time doing blogging. So it got to the point where I was kind of doing half and half. So I was actually able to make a pretty gradual transition before finally jumping over full time. But for me, it was always kind of similar creative thought process when it comes to staring at a blank text editor and writing a piece of code or writing a blog post. In fact, I use the same text editor for coding and for blogging, which maybe is another reason that it seemed like a pretty gradual transition. But for me, it was always the same sort of mental process, thinking of what's the best way to tackle this individual module or this individual component, or the best way to deliver this message that I'm trying to get across in 150 words. So it was a pretty similar thing for me anyway, but I still love both. I still love coding. I still bring up a text editor and knock out a module or a component just for kicks every now and again. But for me, writing has always been my biggest passion.
That's just absolutely fascinating that you could conflate the two. I mean, for me, when I made the switch, I didn't think I was using any of my coding knowledge anymore when I started actually writing stories. Originally, it wasn't about technology, but yeah, I guess I could see that. It's the same attention to detail. It's the same process that you would go through for serious journalism. But I want to talk about that transition you were speaking of, where when you started blogging and then you were doing more blogging and then you had to hit the halfway point and then you made the transition. You speak about it very quickly, but that's actually a very important moment for a lot of new media creators when they start thinking about, well, I like doing this. I may have this job and this job provides for me, but I do this thing in my free time, this blog, and it excites me and it gets me impassioned and I get to write about things I really care about, but can I make a living at it? When did you hit that point at which you realized, I don't need this other thing anymore? I can actually make a living from the writing, from the blogging. I can make a living by letting people hear my opinions on things.
It was definitely a very gradual process as well. I think I was at Engadget for a little over 3 years before I became the editor-in-chief. And through that time, I sort of progressed up from just, kind of a contributor to an associate editor. And then I became the automotive editor at Engadget, the first and still the only automotive editor at Engadget, just because I was really pushing the editorial leadership at the time to do more coverage of the automotive scene, because at that point, the tech crossover in automotive was just beginning. Smartphone connectivity was starting to become a thing. And I felt like we really needed to be doing more of that. So I really pushed forward there, and that ultimately opened the door for a lot more writing for me, and definitely, opened the door for more financial incentive as well. But I didn't really make the full jump 100%, giving up on software development until the editor-in-chief opportunity presented itself. That was still a big decision, because I knew that was a big commitment to give up on the software development thing, the thing that I spent 4 years in college for, spent all that money and got that degree and had, about 8 years of experience and, had a very stellar career behind me that I was about to leave behind. So that was not an easy decision at all. There was a lot of discussion back and forth between myself and AOL, who, of course, owns Engadget, the executives there, whether or not that made sense. My wife and I had a lot of discussions. Darren Murph, a very good friend of mine, and I spent a lot of time talking on the phone. He ultimately became my managing editor at the time. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussions. It was not an easy decision, but ultimately it was one I decided to go for, and I'm very glad that I did.
I think we actually had you on Twit the week where you announced it, when you finally made it public. And I got to say, it was one of those things of, wait, what? What's he doing? Wait, why is he doing that? And it is kind of interesting because, again, we live in a small circle, even though that small circle is getting bigger and bigger all the time, of people who are really passionate about tech. I mean, more passionate about tech than about politics, about pretty much anything else that happens. They want to know what's going on with the companies that they buy their products from. They want to know what's happening to the technologies that they're hoping will be the next generation of a big thing. And they get attached to the personalities, to the journalists who present that information to them. And we've seen it here. Whenever you have someone move from one place to another, there's so much angst and anger and fear and just sometimes just horrible things that happen. You've seen that.
Comments as well. Yes, absolutely. I've been on the receiving end of that. Yeah, I still remember making that announcement post and reading the comments and shaking my head and thinking, what the hell have I gotten myself into? But ultimately, I think, those transitions are never easy, whether you're on, whether you're a part of the transition yourself or whether you're simply, a receiver of the content. And so you're, getting your content from a different source. We worked really, really hard to maintain the integrity of Engadget, to maintain the same voice and the same feel of the site. And I think we did a really, really good job. We broke our backs to maintain that. It was obviously a very traumatic time for a variety of reasons. If you're familiar with the history of the time and the departures and everything else that went on, there was quite a bit of trauma at that time. But we worked really, really hard, the entire team and myself. Did everything we could to maintain the voice of the site. And I think that readers who stayed on board and Engadget at the time will agree that we did a pretty damn good job of that. So I'm quite proud of the work that we did then. It wasn't easy by any means, but my goal at the time was to maintain the status quo, and then ultimately, once we got things stable, to really raise the bar. And over the next 2.5 years, I think we really did that for sure. And I was very proud of a lot of things that we launched. The Engadget Expand series we launched, the Engadget Show we maintained. We launched a tablet magazine that I was hugely proud of. We did a lot of great things, and I think that's testament to the power of bringing in a new voice, a new perspective every now and again. It's important to do that, and I think it's important to make some changes for sure. They're not always easy. I've certainly been on the receiving end of some painful transitions myself, but ultimately, I think things work out for the best.
It's incredibly difficult to do a transition that's not going to alienate a whole bunch of people, both audience and talent. But that one actually went, I'd say, significantly well as far as transitions can go.
Thank you.
People that fire up. But actually, we do have a question here from the chat room. JJ to the 4884 wants to know if you would have any advice for, say, a young graduate or someone who's still in college who might be looking to get into tech journalism. Because in a way, I think we were lucky because we were kind of that transition generation where we didn't know that you could make blogging and things on the internet as a career. Now that people know it feels almost as if it's far more difficult to get in, to make a name for yourself. What would you say to someone who comes up to you and says, Mr. Stevens, I'm going to be graduating next year. I'm passionate about technology. I'm passionate about my writing. What should I do? Who should I meet? Who should I write to get a toehold in this industry?
It is definitely harder to make a name for yourself, but it's so much easier to get into it. There's so many great tools and so many great areas to specialize. And I think specialization is a very important thing if you're getting started. If you start out and you want to cover everything in a very broad way, and if the only thing that you want to bring to the table is your perspective, that's going to be a very difficult thing because ultimately, if you're just getting started, there aren't really that many people who are, to be perfectly bluntly honest, there aren't really that many people who are going to really care what your perspective is. So what you need to do is bring a different perspective to a given area of coverage, bring something very, very focused, and become ultimately the go-to resource for something. It can be as narrow as you like, a specific genre of video game, a specific upgrade for your computer, a specific series of apps on smartphones. Pick something that you can absolutely dominate and become the resource for that given thing. And I think that's the best way if you want to get noticed. Obviously that'll give you a bit of a toehold, just a little bit that you can then start to build upon. Once you build your audience, it's easier to build out from there than trying to just start and cover the entire industry. That's going to be a challenge. The thing, of course, is to write and to get out there, get your word out there as much as you can, and get as much feedback as you possibly can. If you don't absolutely love writing, if you don't absolutely love journalism, and this is going to be a very, very difficult thing because you're going to get beaten at every step. There are going to be people who get the story quicker than you. There are going to be people who get the story better than you. So you're going to need to learn from those mistakes, and you're not going to do that if you're not out there every day trying to do this. So if you can find a site that you respect and try to volunteer for them, see if you can do some contributions in exchange for getting good feedback from editors there. You probably start with a smaller site, but find a site that you respect. And if that doesn't work out, then start your own thing. It's so easy to make a blog these days. That's something that's changed over the past couple of years. Just create a site and, again, find a niche and absolutely own it. I think that's the most important thing.
That's fantastic advice because I know there's a lot of people who are generalists. I tend to be a generalist. I know a lot about technology, but at some point, I focused in on 2 or 3 things that I was really passionate about. And like you said, I said, I'm going to become an expert at this. I'm going to know all the answers, and I'm going to be able to be a person you can go to as a resource. And I think that's what made the difference. You can be smart, you can write well, but unless you're recognized as someone who should be quoted, someone who you should listen to, it gets very difficult to break into the game.
Yeah, for me, when I was still doing game journalism, I tried to specialize on racing games in particular because I've always loved racing and I've loved video games, and it was a pretty good mix. So I actually started my own blog on racing games in particular, and it got pretty good traction in that circle of of readership. So I kind of became one of the go-to people when it came to wanting to know what the latest and greatest race simulator was, or race mod was, that kind of thing. And ultimately, that got me some links here and there, a little bit of traction, and that's kind of what got me the exposure to ultimately get me in at Engadget.
Let's talk about something else that I find actually a little disturbing in some modern cyber journalism. There are, and you know this, you've actually covered this, there is a subgenre of bloggers who are completely fine with what we would call in old-fashioned journalism straight up plagiarism. Just taking huge chunks of internet articles and dropping it into whatever they're writing. In some cases, copying an article entirely and just changing the byline. Or actually, the one that I find most problematic is whenever I see a product review for something that I've also received a review set for, and I see lines straight out of the suggested talking points for the product review. And I'm thinking, it's really easy to do that, but that's going to catch up with you if you ever decide to get serious in this industry. People are going to dig up your old articles and say, well, 90% of his stuff was copied from somebody else. You, in your position, you actually get to look at talent coming in. Do you ever look at people and look at their resumes and look at their body of work and just say, can't do it, sorry, you've already sold away your credibility?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very important. Credibility is something that is a little bit nebulous in this industry, and it's getting more nebulous by the minute, I'm sorry to say. But it's something that is absolutely hugely important. For sure, I'm going to look at everything that I can find that you've written online, and ultimately I'm going to make a judgment call based on the quality of that, both in terms of your voice and your writing ability, but also in terms of your perspective. And ultimately, if I think that perspective is skewed in any way, then ultimately I'm probably not even going to move on to the next step. Before I hire somebody, I would be looking to get more writing samples from them, not just stuff that's been posted online, but things that they write, basically to make sure that they can actually deliver the sorts of things that they posted online in the past. But yeah, for sure, if I don't have complete faith in your ethics, if I don't have complete faith in your perspective and your ability to be independent from the PR speak and the noise that's out there, then I'm probably not going to move forward with you as a candidate. It's just not worth the risk.
Yeah, and exactly, yeah. If you bring people in like that, and then they're now associated with your brand, you can really harm your brand. It only takes one mistake when suddenly people say, well, X outlet just reprints PR press releases, and that's pretty much death in this industry.
Yeah, those sorts of things can take years to recover from, and ultimately, again, if I don't have faith in your voice, so it's very important there will be a lot of tempting offers that will come your way if you start to get a bit of a name for yourself, you start to get a little bit of traffic, you'll suddenly get offers for things that look a lot like gifts, things that look a lot like incentives to say good things, even people who will be offering you maybe even exclusives in exchange for you saying some kind words in the resulting exclusive. Those are the sorts of things that ultimately are, your readers might not notice, but those in the industry will certainly notice. And that can definitely hurt your chances going forward. And those are just things that you should absolutely try to avoid at all costs.
Yeah. I actually worked with a man, I'm not going to say his name, but years ago, and he had developed a reputation as a very good reviewer, and I just remember it was like a 4-year decline where there was one review that he did where I was almost positive that he didn't actually look at the product. He just typed it out and because he was on a deadline, and then after that you saw more and more and more and more, and it's that downward slide where the first time you get away with it, you think, oh well, nothing bad happened. I guess I'm just going to cheap out. And it all came to a head 3 or 4 years after that, and now he can't get a job writing telephone books. And you're right. your word in this business is the only currency you have. And if you sell it off for a couple of trinkets, you got nothing left.
Right, and there's nowhere to climb up to from there. So, if you do sell off, just be prepared for the fact that that's as good as you're ever going to get. So I would not recommend taking that path.
So what you're saying, Mr. Stevens, is that if you're going to sell out, make sure you sell it for something big.
Sell it high if you're going to do it. If you're going to make sure that you can live out comfortably from there, because you may need to.
Because you're done. Well, this is a downer conversation. Let's get away from this and talk about something that we really want to talk about, and that is racing. And I've actually brought in a ringer here from Twit, probably the man in the Twit TV studios who knows the most about racing, about competitive racing, who I catch him all the time down in the no-hole watching races as he's supposed to be editing Twit shows. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him as the Cranky Hippo. It's Mr. Brian Burnett. Brian, thank you for agreeing to be on Padres Corner. I thought you were going to be watching the World Series right now.
You know what? I don't even want to think about that at the moment. But thank you for that introduction, because that's very accurate, actually.
We're not going to lie. No.
No. But as far as being the racing expert at Twit, I don't think the bar has been set that high here, but I'll try my best.
Yeah, I think the second racing aficionado here might be Tony.
Tony's he's a little disappointing. He actually, I shared my racing pass with him to watch stuff online. I don't think he's watched anything this whole year, and I have nobody to talk to about it. So
yeah, and I only race drones. So
right.
But gentlemen, we've got 3 people here who appreciate racing, either for the pure love of the sport or like me, because I love the tech behind racing. And I'm sure there's something that we can talk about. Actually, this came in the pre-show. Tim, I've been following your Twitter, and every once in a while I'll see a picture of you in just some ridiculous place. You were at the Indianapolis 500 this year?
I've been at Indianapolis, but no, I was not at the 500. I was actually doing a test of the new EBR 1190, which is their new sport bike. So they actually closed the track for a day, and I was lucky enough to be able to ride on the track in the new Buell. The company formerly known as Buell, now known as EBR. So they were launching that bike. They were actually the first company to do a product launch at the Indy circuit. And again, I was very privileged to be able to go out there and ride the thing on the track, which was quite an experience.
How do you get that? I mean, seriously, we've been here at Twit going, could we please test something? Test a car, test a bike. We've got a racetrack 20 miles from here that we just love to peel out on. That's a super special subset of technology, yes?
Yeah, that was pretty exciting. So, it's not exactly the most high-tech bike in the world, but it's got some pretty cool stuff. It's got a full-color LCD touchscreen on there, which is kind of a rarity when it comes to motorcycles, and 21 levels of traction control, which is definitely the most levels of traction control that I've ever seen on a bike before. You can go from, full-on granny mode if you're really nervous on the thing to, turn it off entirely if you really want to kill yourself, perhaps. I was very lucky and very happy to have those modes because it was actually raining the day that I was there, and, going 160 miles an hour down the straight into a wet turn 1 is a bit of a disconcerting thing. So it's very good to have the traction control on there. It's also got ABS and various power modes and lots of other stuff too. So some fun tech on there. It's still, not an EV, nothing hybrid on there, nothing fancy when it comes to the drivetrain other than a big old V-twin slung between your legs, which made pretty damn good power.
Yeah, it actually makes for a really good conversation too. Now, let me ask you about this, because I've actually been really getting into Formula One this year with all the new technology and what Mercedes brought to the game. It's been a fun ride to watch the races, and I don't really have the appreciation yet. I get excited, but I know I'm not quite there yet. What is it about, say, F1 or MotoGP that you think makes for the truest fans, the most hardcore fans?
Well, I've been an F1 fan since, I guess, the late 80s, around 1990. So I've been watching this series for a long, long time now. And ultimately, the racing, got really boring for a while. You're actually coming in at a pretty good time because there's been a fairly good season. The race between Lewis and Nico has been very good. There's been a lot of excitement, and I think that the new technologies introduced in the cars this year, the turbochargers and the curve systems and the drag reduction systems and all that stuff, ultimately it has led to some better racing. I be honest with you, I think it's a little bit too finicky. I think they're adding too many gimmicks to the racing to try to make it better, and ultimately it's been successful. So I guess there's that. But ultimately, if you look back at the mid to late '90s, there was a lot of amazing technology. They were cars with all-wheel steering. Active downforce, active braking, traction control, all sorts of good stuff. And there was still really, really great racing back then. So I'd like to see, a little bit, more technology for technology's sake, not technology for gimmick's sake. So I guess it's one of the reasons that I'm more of a fan of MotoGP at this point, because I think there's more to do with the rider than there is with the technology. I mean, obviously there's a lot of great tech in MotoGP as well when it comes to traction control, wheelie control, and lots of good stuff there too. The bikes at this point know exactly what point they are on the track, and so they are optimizing their traction control settings for each individual corner on the track. I actually was at Indy not too long ago, talking with the Honda team, talking with Marquez as a chief engineer about the sorts of tweaks and tricks and things that they can do, and optimizing traction based on lead angle and position on the track, and going out and measuring the traction coefficient on each corner of the asphalt. It's amazing stuff. But ultimately, there's so much more that is to do with the rider in MotoGP, and you'll see some riders that are great on certain tracks. Nicky Hayden, for example, was always great on tracks with a lot of fast left-handers because he comes from a dirt oval background, and stuff like that. I think is what really makes MotoGP more exciting. The racing tends to be a lot closer, and there's a lot more variability there too.
Yeah. Now, Brian, we actually talked about one of the innovations in F1 racing earlier in the year on Know-How. I remember last season it was the blown diffuser. That was the thing that was the performance boost until F1 said, you can't use that anymore. This season, it's the turbo that Mercedes installed, which moved the compressor to the back of the exhaust so that you can get cooler boost into the engine. It seemed like such just a minuscule change, but it just made all the difference in the technology. And like Tim was saying, Mercedes just killed the F1 series this year. It's a race for basically third, because the number one and number two is going to be Mercedes. But would you say, Brian, that that's why you like MotoGP more, because the technology in MotoGP can't win you a race if you don't have a good driver?
Right. No, there's definitely that, and it's a very fine line, and it's kind of hard to tell when it's been crossed, where technology is breaking into beyond a rider's talent or something like that. But you watch these guys in MotoGP on 250 plus horsepower bikes, and the thing, it's the top tier riders. You can tell that they do things that normal humans just can't really achieve without practicing constantly since 3 years old, I think some of them are. But yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why I like MotoGP so much, is because there's been riders in the past. Casey Stoner is one of them that comes to mind, that he didn't have the best bike for a long time, but he still was able to win because of how he raced and how good he was at what he did. And I think I was reading a statistic more recently that these last few races of MotoGP have actually been the closest time-wise within. So the gap between each rider has been much reduced compared to past years of MotoGP. So even though you look at stats where Marc Marquez, who's the top rider at the moment, he just won this year's title. I think he won the first, 12 races? Tim, do you remember?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, he absolutely was totally dominant.
Just dominated, but it also wasn't like, there was a couple races where he was just so far ahead of everyone that it was kind of sad, but there was also times where he started in the back of the field and then just came back and cut by everybody in rain and all sorts of different conditions where they had to switch bikes mid-race and stuff. And so that's why, I mean, I feel like this was the year that was the most entertaining. I've been watching probably the last 6-7 years solidly of MotoGP. What would you say, Tim? Do you think this year was a good race?
Yeah, it's been very good. MotoGP has been getting a little bit quiet too since traction control came in. It's gotten a little bit less exciting than it used to. I started watching MotoGP probably around 2004, 2005, kind of at the peak of the Valentino Rossi era, who's this kind of flamboyant Italian rider who, back in those days, he was so dominant that he would basically he would pass everybody, go right to the front, and then realize that he was faster than everybody. So he would back off, let a couple people pass him. He would follow them around for a couple laps, and then at the last lap, the last corner, he'd blow by him again just to prove that he could. And he was so dominant that he actually changed teams because he wanted to go. Everybody said it was the bike. He said, no, it's not the bike, it's me. So he changed teams to a team that was not winning races, and immediately went out and started winning races again on this new team just to prove that he could do it. And that's the sort of thing that you don't see in F1. Riders have contracts that are, so huge and so restrictive that you wouldn't see them doing that kind of thing ultimately on a whim. And ultimately, they know that the car is such a huge, important part of the package that they wouldn't be able to do that sort of thing. And Rossi was able to do it. So that was part of the thing that cemented my love for MotoGP. It's definitely been a great season. Even though Marquez has been dominant, it's the kind of thing that you can appreciate it. If 6 years from now he's acting like Michael Schumacher and he's won every race for the next 6 years, that might change. But for now, it's still exciting to see.
Well, it is also, you mentioned Rossi. It's fun to see how he came from the 500cc two strokes, and then the V4 1000cc four strokes.
Yeah.
To see him progress and just dominate. But then now that Marquez is in it, they're kind of like battling. And then you say he left to go from Honda to Yamaha to prove that he could do it. And then he tried to do it again with Ducati. Didn't really work out.
Unfortunately didn't work out so
And then he came back to Yamaha, and he's pretty much back to where he was when he left. And it's fun to watch he's not old, but I think he's like 36, 35,
36, 37, something like that. Yeah.
Which is, I guess, that's old
Ancient.
for MotoGP. And Marquez is 21 or just turned 21, so it's kind of fun to watch the new gun fight the old gun.
No, wait, gentlemen. I want to get back to MotoGP in a bit, but first, I want to discuss something that I believe is going to be the future of all racing, and I think Tim, you'll be able to agree with me on this. The number one thing that is going to replace every kind of racing on the planet is, of course, the Formula E. This is was the most exciting racing it really wasn't. This was the crash at the end of the first Formula E race in Beijing, and I have to say that was probably the most exciting part of the race. I mean, that's these cars at full tilt.
That's not them just going through the pit?
No, that's full speed.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
It's a strange series. It's also unfortunate, when it comes to technology, I appreciate the teams, trying to optimize their technology within a given rule set, coming up with different innovative solutions. But all the teams that you see in Formula E are driving the same car with different paint, basically, which is a little bit disappointing too.
Yeah, and the thing about that is I was really excited for it. I'm like, oh, this could be exciting. I mean, if you've seen a true electronic muscle car, it's ridiculous acceleration, and the performance is outstanding.
All-wheel drive Tesla?
Yeah, like the all-wheel drive Tesla. And I mean, especially now that they're coming up with the new titanium dioxide batteries that can be recharged in 2 minutes. You're talking about an actual pit-stoppable car where you can do 20 laps, 30 laps, full tilt, come in for a 2-minute pit stop, and you're back at full tilt. That's got me excited. But is it just that the technology's not here yet? We don't really have the battery tech or the car tech to be able to make an exciting all-electric racer?
Yeah, at least when it comes to cars, I think you could make a compelling case that we could be there right now with motorcycles. In fact, the TTX GP at the Isle of Man every year has actually become a pretty competitive race. So the Isle of Man is a big time trial where basically each rider is out going around, and they shut down the entire island. They race around the island and they time themselves, and that's a hugely historic, very important race in the world of motorcycles. For the past couple of years, they've been doing an electric version of that as well, which is they've gotten to the point where they're not as fast as the gas bikes, obviously, but quite quick and quite competitive. So I think right now they could be doing competitive stuff on bikes because, the aerodynamic demands are so much lower. The speeds are high, but ultimately the demands on the batteries and the motors are much lower. So I think that they'd have more success if they were doing electric bike racing than electric car racing. Cars are bigger and they're heavier. There's a much more drag involved. So there's a lot more work being put on those batteries. Plus, a car battery pack is a lot bigger than a bike battery pack. You can imagine swapping one of those out pretty quickly if you had to. But yeah, I just don't think the technology is right there for car EV racing just yet. But yeah, absolutely. In a few years, it's going to be there for sure. It's going to be the future of racing. I think a lot of people are going to complain about the lack of noise, but I personally love the sound of a straight cut gearbox and an electric motor. I think it sounds pretty great.
I mean, I had an opportunity here to review the DS Zero bike that they released. I think it was the 2014 model, but it sounds like a Tron bike when you really get on it sometimes. And then after a certain point, you just hear wind noise when you're riding it, but it was a lot of fun. And I know you had an opportunity to ride the Energica
Ego, yeah, the Italian exotic superbike that I think is, if I remember right, for about $40,000, something to that effect.
Yeah, I think the Zero I rode was priced at like 16.
The last bike I rode was a Harley V-twin, and it wasn't mine. And Brian knows that I laid it down. So.
You had to, right?
No.
I know. It was either lay it down or go over someone's roof. So, but yeah, he was a little upset.
Yeah, those aren't cheap either.
It was in Milwaukee, and he had literally just driven it from the factory to the house.
You should start on an electric bike, Padre.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the most fun I had. All you had to worry about was the front brake and the throttle, you know? Those are the fastest I ever left an intersection was on that bike, you know?
Now, how about this? I mean, we've seen it in F1 already, where you've got the hybrid boost systems. And those are fantastic. That whole push to pass, the idea that you're saving up power that you can use to actually give yourself a competitive boost in the race. That's a cool hybrid system. And I like it just because you see more passing, and it really does require more strategy of where I'm going to use my energy. I know I have a certain amount of energy. I'm going to use it here, here, and here, rather than I'm just going to lay on the throttle the entire time and hopefully no one will pass me. I kind of like that. I mean, if you can do something like that in electric racing, but still have the excitement. And I think you're right. There's something about the roar of an engine that you don't quite get with the whine of a motor. But you know, what do you need to make it exciting, Tim?
I think applicability back to the road is an important thing, and actually that kind of push to pass technology is one of the things that actually has made its way back to road cars in a very limited fashion. But if you look at the McLaren P1, it's their latest hypercar, and that's basically their lower end car, the 12C. They took the same motor, they put some big old turbos on there, and ultimately when you do that causes throttle response to go down. Give you more power, but ultimately won't be necessarily as much fun to drive. So what they did is they slapped a hybrid system on there, and so in the point where you would expect to have turbo lag and turbo, as the boost is building to give you power, they kind of fill that what they call the torque gap with an electric motor that then kind of gives you the drive out of the turns, gives you the throttle response that you would expect out of a hypercar, and then once the turbos are in, they can kind of dial that back, and they can actually suck some power from the motor to charge the battery so that you can come out the next corner quickly. That's the kind of technology that we've seen in F1 now with push to pass, with KERS and that kind of thing, which is now coming to cars, which is good. But ultimately, I think racing needs to be pushing forward street technology. It needs to have some sort of tie back to the road. And ultimately, Formula E, I think, is a little bit too unrelated in that way, and so is a lot of the stuff that we see in F1. The drag reduction systems and things like that, the lack of active suspension, things that we see as standard in cars now, that's still banned in F1. I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. What about Brian and I were talking about this the other day down in the no hole. If for the big MotoGP bikes, we've seen all electric MotoGP bikes, and we saw them. There was actually a pretty decent documentary of them racing the Isle of Man, and it's not good. I mean, they're so heavy and they're so hard to pull around turns. And have you ever watched racing in the Isle of Man, Tim?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Isle of Man is one of the most amazing things. I have not made it there yet, but it's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
But as Brian is apt to say, on the Isle of Man, if you have a handling problem, it's not that you lose a race; it's that you die.
Yeah. There's a very fine line.
But we were thinking, what if you could have something in MotoGP where you could recover kinetic energy, something like the KERS system in F1, from when you're going into a turn, just enough to torque you back up coming out of the turn while you're waiting for your turbo to spool up. Is that something that would be worthwhile? Especially, and Brian was thinking about this, if you could use the regenerative braking on your bike to actually slow you down rather than having to wail on your brakes, it could make for this awesome strategic battle that really plays second fiddle again to the talent of the driver.
It's a lot trickier on bikes because, of course, the engine is connected to the rear wheel, but most of your braking is through the front wheel. So that's actually something that I usually take the point of asking EV engineers when they're designing electric bikes is, are they using regenerative braking, and if so, how much? And quite a few don't use any at all because you don't want a lot of braking through the rear wheel, and ultimately you want it to be predictable. So if the motor is doing the braking, that could lock up the rear wheel, which is going to be a problem, or at least reduce grip in the rear wheel. Right. A lot of track riders never even touch the rear brake. They'll simply use the front one because you're doing maybe 80% of your braking through the front. So there's not a lot of grip there to be used and to be pulled back into regenerative braking. So unfortunately, that's not really much of an option when it comes to getting power. You could get some power back into the motor, but or into the battery, but it wouldn't be the sort of thing that you can expect from Formula One or from a lot of other racing series, especially anything with an all-wheel drive system. So there's not that much to be gained there on a bike, especially because there's a lot less mass too. So you need to be slowing down something heavy to be able to get a lot of power back in.
I have a college classmate who does engineering. He's an engineer, but on the weekends he likes to mess with his bike. He's down in Oakland, and he was actually working on a regen braking system for his bike. And what he told me was the problem is that when you're doing regen braking, when the power cells are full, you don't regen brake anymore. It disengages because there's nowhere for the power to go. So if you're counting on your regen braking to take you through a corner and suddenly it's no longer slowing your bike, you've got a problem. And I guess you're right. If you don't have the consistency through a corner, it's not just not efficient anymore. Again, it brings you back to dead. Dead's bad.
Dead's no good.
Yeah. Well, Brian, so then we've got no regen braking on MotoGP. Why should I be concerned? Why should I care about MotoGP? Why are you always watching it down in the no hole?
Because like Tim pointed out earlier, it's definitely the best riders on the most technically advanced bikes in the world, and it's to the point of the braking. Like if the rear wheel's in the air, which it tends to happen in MotoGP, 100% of the braking is done on the front. So that was a good point. I hadn't really thought about that with the regenerative braking, but also like I worked the track day at Laguna Seca, and they do have e-bike races there. And I think the typical MotoGP race was around 23 laps or something like that. And the e-bikes was more like 9 laps. And I would say out of the 11 bikes that raced, 7 of them made it. A couple of the products that they brought to the track were like, okay, this is a race bike with a decent battery technology to it. But a few of them were like, okay, this is a frame that you strap some batteries to. So I'd really like to see the technology progress with, I guess, the battery technology integrated with like the motorcycle tech and suspension and everything, because it's getting there, and it's definitely advanced a lot faster in these last few years than it has in the past. And especially if you look at the Isle of Man TT races, like those bikes do pretty well for what they're at, and every year they seem to get a little bit better. So I'm looking forward to seeing some more stuff. I just wish the resources that are poured into MotoGP, the millions of dollars that go into MotoGP, maybe if they put some of that into e-bikes, because I could see like an evolution. With the McLaren, what if there was an evolution of a hybrid motorcycle engine bike, electric bike?
It'd be cool.
It would be cool.
Gentlemen, we are actually at the end of our hour, and I've had an absolute blast. But before we go, would each of you have some advice for a person like me who maybe knows a little bit about racing, maybe has watched a couple of races, is interested, but doesn't really have the passion for it, the flame for it? What would you tell me to do? What would you tell me to watch? If I could only watch one event the entire year, what should that event be? And Cranky Hip, I want to start with you. What's the thing you're telling me that I cannot miss because it will put the love of racing into my heart?
Oh, wow, Padre. Way to drop that bombshell on me. You see, the MotoGP stuff is over a long period of time. You could watch like a highlight reel of that, of maybe a year's summary, and that, with the slow motion cameras and stuff that they do, is pretty incredible to watch. But if there was one event that if I could sit you down and just make you watch it, is I can't remember the name of it, but it's it's like in Eastern Europe, they put all these dirt bikes into a giant pit that has been dug out, and then they all race out of this pit going up this like man-made hill, and they go on for, I think it's most of the day. And it's just some of the craziest racing by professionals, by amateurs, just anybody who wants to get into it, I guess. And it's fun to watch. So dirt bikes.
So you'd want to like force me to watch the race.
Yes,
basically.
I would do
Just,
that
like,
too.
Strap me down and open up my eyes.
And if you couldn't appreciate that, then I would say just don't. It's not for you, Padre.
Okay, well, Tim, what about you? What is your race? What is the thing that you believe is going to put the love of the sport into my heart? If I could only watch one event, what would it be?
If you're watching on TV, definitely the Isleman TT, I would say, just because I've never seen somebody change the channel, when they're flipping through. They used to be on HD Net back when that was a thing. And I remember a lot of people would go, hey, have you seen those guys who race around in England who are crazy? Just so many random people would just be flipping through the channels and would be amazed by the speeds and the danger. So that's a pretty amazing thing to see, and that can kind of open the door to motorcycle racing in general. If you're going to an event, though, I'd say probably a Formula One race, just because the cars are ridiculously loud and fun, and it's a great scene and a lot of great smells, and the circus that you see at an F1 race is kind of insane. So those would be, if you're in person, F1, and it's in Austin this weekend, which is a great track. If you're watching on TV, then the Isleman, I think, is the way to go, the TT, the senior TT in particular.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so very much for being on this episode of Padres Corner. This was a lot of fun. Again, the idea is cover some topics that maybe we wouldn't normally cover on a tech network, and I think we did that today. Could you please tell the folks at home where they can find out more about you? Let's start with you, Cranky Hippo, because you're here all the time. Where should people go if they want to find out more about what you're doing, about the shows that you're producing, that you're directing, or that you're hosting on Twit TV?
Well, yeah, I do a little bit of everything here at Twit. Started out video editing, then TDing, and now hosting Know How with you on Thursdays. So, and I think now I'm going to be doing Twit with you too. But yeah, you can also follow me on Twitter at cranky_hippo, my fortunate name choice, and I tend to post pictures of really ripped dachshunds on there. So. Yeah, that's where you can keep up with me and my exploits, I guess. Now, I do want to point out one piece of symmetry here, and that's both yours and Tim's profile have bikes on them. That's true. That's
and that is the aforementioned Energy Ego, by the way, and that is me astride the aforementioned Energy Ego.
Well, Tim, what about you? Of course, they're going to find you on CNET, all over CNET, and they should probably follow you on your Twitter account. But where else can they find you to make sure that they're keeping up to date with the projects that you're working on?
Well, CNET's definitely the best place. I'll have a couple of car reviews coming up in the not-too-distant future. I was just lucky enough to be testing the 2015 Nissan GT-R, which is quite a car, so there'll be a review of that coming up. And I was in Germany not too long ago testing out the Volkswagen GTE, which is their plug-in hybrid version of the kind of iconic hot hatch that they've been making for ages. So footage of those two coming up. You can catch me in LA at the LA Auto Show here in a couple of weeks. And then you'll be able to catch me at CES not too long after that, I guess, as well. But yeah, Tim_Stevens on the Twitters, and CNET.com for everything else.
And I actually will be seeing you at CES as well. I'll be there with a small crew. So
great.
We'll come and say hi.
Yeah.
Look me up.
Well, gentlemen, thanks again for being on Padres Corner. It is an absolute pleasure and honor. And we'll have you back for something. Maybe I'll get some NASCAR folks on and we can duke it out.
Yeah, good talking to you, Tim.
Yeah, it's been great.
Take care.
Thanks.
Now, folks, this is the end of Padres Corner, but this is not the end of my time on Twit TV. I'm all over the place. You can find me Mondays for This Week in Enterprise Tech at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, of course, where I talk about networking. I talk about data closets. I talk about how we're connected across the world. On Tuesdays, you can find me here for Padres Corner at 7:30, and normally you'll find me on Before You Buy at 3 o'clock. Don't forget, on Thursdays, you can find me twice, once at 11 o'clock for Know How with Brian Burnett, where we take you through some of the projects that we've been working out. Maybe you can DIY or maker yourself into Nirvana. And at 1:30, it's all about Coding 101. If you want to find out the secrets of the coding masters, you you got to drop by. Now, I also want to make sure that if you want to follow what I'm doing, follow me on my Twitter account. You can find me at twitter.com/PadreSJ. There you'll find not just the shows that I'm doing, and you won't just be able to suggest topics for future shows, but it's really a cool way to figure out what I do in order to prep for each show. Again, that's twitter.com/PadreSJ. And don't forget that you can always find every episode of Padre's Corner at twit.tv/Padre. Not only are you going to get all of the episodes in whatever format you want, not only is there a place where you can subscribe to download the audio or the video versions to your devices of choice, but you'll also get the links for every show. So if there was a story that you found particularly interesting, just go to twit.tv/Padre, click the show, and find the show notes. I want to thank everyone here who makes this show possible, to Lisa and Leo for letting me abuse their studio, to all the directors and the editors and the TDs who don't get mad at me when I use this space. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballas here, and you came out sane on the other side of Padre's Corner.